Last year, I covered the sad story of Sherry Byrne, the 22-year-old woman from Hamilton County, Ohio, who was kidnapped and murdered by David Brewer, a man she believed to be her friend. These horrible events unfolded in March of 1985. While researching that case, I came across another which took me down an equally difficult path of research. The case of Cathy Sano came to light in February of 1982, just miles from where Sherry's life was taken 3 years later. It was another Ohio-based fight for justice that ran parallel to the Sherry Byrne story for years to come. This is the Quail Run Racquet Club, situated on Brown Road in Sugar Creek Township, Greene County. During the 1980s, there was a small wasteland situated behind this sports club. It was a popular hangout for teenagers and a well-known dumping ground for refuse and disused car parts. It was here in 1982 that 18-year-old William Alley from nearby Xenia, while rummaging for a spare tyre for his truck, uncovered a human skull. Alley reported the find to Greene County Police on Tuesday, February 2nd, 1982. Through dental records, the skull was found to belong to 14-year-old Cathy Sano of 5680 Coach Drive West in Kettering, who had been missing since July 16, 1981. Cathy was last seen on foot just over a mile north of her home on the intersection of Wilmington Pike and Park Lawn Drive. It's believed that she was returning home from a friend's house. This sighting was made by local woman Beulah Huston of Drayton Court, who said she had seen a girl that she was 95% sure was Cathy getting into a dark-coloured Oldsmobile. Huston said that the girl first appeared to be pointing out directions to the driver before getting in. Thinking little of it, Huston then left for vacation and did not report it until she heard about the unsolved case on her return. When the land behind the Quail Run Racquet Club was searched on February the 3rd, the rest of Cathy Sano's partially sunken remains were recovered, along with some underwear and a pair of grey trousers. Coroner William McCarthy ruled her death a homicide, probably caused by the impact of a blunt object to the right side of her head. Death, he said, would have come at around the same time she went missing almost 7 months earlier. He said that it was possible that she had also suffered lacerations, bullet or stab wounds, but due to the decomposition, this was impossible to tell. There were 4 immediate suspects. The young man William Alley, who found Cathy's skull, was one, but he may have avoided such suspicion if he had been completely honest from the outset. He eventually admitted to police that he had found the skull in January, more than 2 weeks before reporting it. During that time, he had carried it around in the back of his truck and had even shown it to a friend. Alley and his unnamed friend were questioned about their disregard for the girl's remains, but both men said they thought the skull belonged to an animal. Police considered charging them for falsification of a police report and the abuse of a corpse, but following a 5-hour-long polygraph test, it was ruled that they were telling the truth. Ultimately, neither man faced charges and they were dropped from the investigation. Another suspect on the police radar at this time was 36-year-old Robert Dale Henderson of Exmansville. An already hunted man at large, he was wanted for a series of murders, including the January 21st shooting of his wife's parents and their 11-year-old son. He was also wanted in 5 other states for a series of robberies, burglaries and a sexual assault. However, Henderson, who was to hand himself in on February the 6th and admit to no less than a dozen murders, was ultimately disregarded in Cathy's case, because investigators came to the conclusion that the killer must have lived nearby, as the land behind the sports club was only known by local people and was not an obvious hiding spot. When several of Cathy Sano's friends were questioned, one name which kept coming up was Christian Wells. The 29-year-old was known to have had a fixation on Cathy. He often approached her, tried to make conversation, and showed up regularly at her softball games. He was also allegedly heard saying that he wanted her sexually. Known as a bit of a drifter, Wells was first interviewed by police regarding Cathy's disappearance in August of 1981, and again in March of 1982. On both occasions he denied knowing her. When he was approached again in August of 82, he admitted that he knew of her, but denied having any kind of contact. There was no physical evidence linking Wells to Cathy Sano, but police were sure he was their man. In 1983, a Greene County grand jury was, on 2 occasions, presented with the witness statements linking Wells to Cathy Sano in the hope that an arrest warrant would be granted. Both times it was turned down. It wasn't until police turned to a more recent unsolved case that an arrest was made. On October 23, 1982, the body of 18-year-old Teresa Metcalf was discovered by a group of children at an abandoned drive-in theatre on West 3rd Street, Dayton. The cause of death was ruled as strangulation and a blow to the head. She had been missing for 2 weeks. Christian Wells, who resided in Jefferson Township, Montgomery County, had his home searched in relation to the Metcalf killing in November of '83. Within his home, police found a piece of jewellery that, according to a friend of hers, belonged to Teresa. Christian Wells was arrested on January 1, 1984. His lawyer, Dennis Lieberman, opposed the arrest, saying that the presence of jewellery at his home was not enough to justify his detainment. Furthermore, a television crew filmed as officers carried out the search, something Lieberman said was a violation of Wells' rights. Christian Wells was released 2 days later. In the hope of finding more evidence, another search of the area in which Cathy was found was made in 1984, but this time efforts were severely hampered by the construction of the new Interstate 675, and no more clues were found. A relatively new forensic technology was used to analyse Cathy's clothing in the hope that it would turn up a hair, clothes fibre or a trace of body fluid from the killer, but again nothing was found. It wasn't until Friday, April 13, 1984, that the now 32-year-old Christian Wells was rearrested at his brother's home on Dayton Liberty Road, Jefferson Township, on suspicion of murdering Cathy Sano. This came after a, quote, investigations of connections between the death of Sano and Metcalf. This likely referred to witness statements from friends and family of Cathy Sano, but may have also been supported by the outcome of a meeting between Wells and police officers at a local mental health centre, where he reportedly expressed hatred towards women and referred to himself as God. These grounds for arrest were to be a constant bone of contention for Wells' defence lawyers Dennis Lieberman and Louis Hoffman. Christian Wells' trial began at the Xenia Common Police Court in June of 1984, at which time he pleaded not guilty. However, on Thursday, June the 7th, Judge Judson Shattuck Jr. declared a mistrial after threats were made to Wells' defence, and a member of the jury received an anonymous phone call telling them to hang Wells. The trial with a new jury was resumed on Wednesday, June the 13th in the city of Van Wert, 100 miles northwest of Kettering. There was a great deal of television coverage, and people even flocked to the courthouse to witness it for themselves. The press compared the spectacle to shows like Perry Mason and the People's Court, with viewers opting to miss these shows to attend the courthouse. The Xenia Daily Gazette, dated June 25, 1984, wrote, "The trial of Christian J. Wells is leaving a lot of laundry undone, a few vacations rescheduled and even a few families going without supper. Many of the housewives attending admit missing General Hospital." It was immediately established that Cathy Sano had stayed with friends Julie Miller and Gwen Jenkins on the night of July 15, 1981, at Miller's home on 2367 Glenheath Drive. The next day, Cathy refused a lift home from Miller's mother and instead visited 19-year-old Greg Lamblin at his apartment on Wilmington Pike. According to Greg, who just before the trial had been serving in the US Marine Corps in Japan, they had listened to records and had sex, adding that he thought Cathy was 16 at the time. She left his apartment at around 5:30 p.m. on July the 16th and made her way home, he said. You may remember this is the same day that Beulah Huston says she saw a girl who she was almost certain was Cathy giving directions to the driver of a dark-coloured Oldsmobile before getting into the car. Cathy was reported missing later that day by her mother when she failed to show up for a softball game at the Indian Riffle Park. Cathy's mother identified the grey trousers that her daughter wore the day she disappeared. Nancy Sano, Cathy's sister, said that Wells often followed them and sometimes offered to sell them dope. She said when they tried to hide or evade him, he would just stop and stare. She also said that he often hung around the same places as they did, like the softball games and a donut shop known as Paul's. Wells' defence lawyers argued that these were public places, frequented by many people of all ages, and what's more, Christian Wells' niece Carol also played softball at the same sports ground, so it shouldn't be considered strange that he'd also attend. Nancy Sano retorted that Wells was never seen again at any of these places after Cathy's disappearance. Janice Knight, a friend of Cathy Sano's sister, said that Wells had threatened her after she'd spoken to Kettering police during their initial investigation. He allegedly said to her to be quiet or you'll be next. Knight had described Wells to police as chubby with black hair, 3 or 4 days beard growth, and that he'd smelled bad. She could not, however, identify him in the courtroom. Wells' defence said that Knight's statements were likely fabricated and that she'd only formed her opinion of him through speaking to the Sano family. According to Stephen Wells, the older brother of Christian, both himself and Christian were at his Jefferson Township home, 11 miles north of Kettering, remodelling a bedroom on the day that Cathy Sano went missing. Stephen showed the court his own receipts for tools and materials dated July 16, 1981. He also presented cheques written by himself to Christian to pay for the work his brother had done. They were dated August 1981. When asked why they weren't dated July, when the work had been carried out, Stephen claimed that he did not have funds to pay his brother immediately. 20-year-old Rick Rost, a friend of Christian's, said that Wells drove a yellow station wagon and sometimes a green Buick, which was actually his mother's, but never an Oldsmobile. Any favours Rost had done the defence with this explanation was undone when he added that Wells had once said to him, "You can sometimes be forgiven for killing a woman," something to do with the Mormon religion. It was then that several people came forward to say that Wells had admitted killing Cathy. The first was 23-year-old David Ritchie, but Ritchie added that after Wells had made the claim, he immediately went back on it by saying he was joking. Ritchie admitted that he didn't take the statement at all seriously, but also records seeing scratches on Wells' face at this time. 26-year-old Bill Hayslip of Centerville said that after several beers in the summer of 1982, Wells had also told him that he had killed Cathy. A man named Robert Culverhouse, an employee of the donut shop that Wells was said to frequent, said that Wells had told him the same thing and that he'd seen him tear down one of Cathy's missing posters. But brothers Mark and David Loomis from Moraine, who had grown up with Christian Wells, said that Robert Culverhouse himself had claimed to be involved in the crime, something they didn't believe as they knew him to be a liar and someone who, quote, just wanted to be in on the action. Expressing sympathy for Wells, the Loomis brothers claimed that the teenagers in the area took advantage of him by using him for drugs and often sat in the back of his vehicle playing cards and smoking. Patricia Buckley, a waitress at the King Point pub in Kettering, said the following of Wells: "He told me angels had to forgive him because he had been bad. When asked why, he said because he'd killed a girl." She added that he'd bragged about being a suspect in the Sano case, admitting that she hadn't reported the conversation until police contacted her, something she regretted. The last people to claim Wells had admitted to the murder were 3 inmates of Greene County Jail. According to them, when Wells found out that they were going to testify against him, he allegedly said, "It doesn't matter what I told you, my high-power lawyers will shoot you down." Following a psychological examination, Dr. Arthur Scram said that Wells' confessions were likely false. Dr. Scram believed that Christian Wells craved importance and high standing with his peers in and out of prison, and this was his way of getting it. Scram added that Wells was a borderline schizophrenic and a fantasist, and for him, the damaging consequences did not outweigh the feeling of importance. However, on June 27, 1984, the day before the closing arguments for the trial began, Dr. Warren Shea disagreed with Dr. Scram. He believed that the confessions were genuine, because if Wells was a fantasist as Scram had said, he would not have later denied the claim. The denial, Shea said, was a clear attempt at avoiding punishment. What's more, if he was trying to impress people, he would not have admitted the lie. After 3 weeks of hearing evidence, Christian Wells' fate was decided on June 29, 1984. He was handed a sentence of 15 years to life, which was the maximum prison sentence for murder. The more serious charge of aggravated murder was avoided, because premeditation, rape and/or abduction, the elements needed to bring about the charge, could not be proved. Dennis Lieberman said, "I'm disappointed and frankly a little surprised. We thought the circumstantial evidence was very weak." He added that an appeal was likely. Christian Wells was transported to Columbus to begin his sentence the next day. Dennis Lieberman did file an appeal on July the 8th stating that the evidence was insufficient and that an inmate of Greene County Jail, Ralph Donaldson, had contacted the defense co-counsel Louis Hoffman to tell him that he and other inmates had been promised leniency in their own trials, as well as money, toiletries and candy in exchange for testimony against Wells. Lieberman later amended the appeal grounds, stating that there had been sightings of Cathy Sano after July 16, 1981. This was largely based on the claim given by a woman named Ethel Marie Strauff, who said on August 18, 1981, she had seen a girl who looked just like Cathy after recognising her from a missing poster. Ethel Strauff said that she had reported the sighting at the time, but was ignored. This claim by Strauff triggered a hearing for a retrial. But at the August 1984 hearing, Ethel Strauff came across as vague and unsure of the girl she'd seen. In an attempt to save his client, Dennis Lieberman told Judge Shattuck that there had been as many as 40 other sightings of Cathy after the day she disappeared. However, I could find no record of how Lieberman sourced this information. Wells' defense also wanted the retrial, if granted, to take place in a new location, because they believed that the communities of Van Wert and Kettering had been tainted by the vast media coverage. Judge Shattuck overruled the new trial motion. He said that sufficient grounds had not been established, adding that a different result would not be reached at a second trial. Dennis Lieberman was to make a second appeal in 1985. However, the basis for this appeal largely relied on a bizarre statement given by Sharon Culverhouse, the wife of Robert Culverhouse, who worked at Paul's Donut Shop. The affidavit signed by Sharon said that she had witnessed her husband, Robert, kill Cathy back in 1981. It went on to say that Mrs. Culverhouse knew that Cathy had run away from home and had worked as a prostitute. He killed her, Sharon said, because she, quote, was not working out as a call girl. At the time Mrs. Culverhouse gave this alleged statement, her husband was in rehab for alcohol abuse. However, when pressed for more details, Sharon Culverhouse said that she had been tricked into giving a drunken statement by her sister, who happened to be a good friend of Dennis Lieberman, Wells' lawyer. She said that after drinking around 12 beers, Lieberman showed up at her sister's house, where she was staying at the time, at around 2 a.m. one night to take a statement that Mrs. Culverhouse claimed she could not remember giving. Dismissing the appeal, the new residing judge, John C. Bacon, said that the Culverhouse statement was absolutely incredible. Lieberman argued that the new evidence was no less valuable than the circumstantial evidence that had put his client behind bars in the first place. But all hope for Dennis Lieberman's 1985 appeal was dashed when Sharon Culverhouse confirmed that she had not met her husband until 1982, several months after Cathy died. The ever-determined Dennis Lieberman filed for several more appeals between 1986 and 1992, introducing a new claim that Judge Judson Shattuck Jr. had encouraged the 1984 jury to read about the case and had private conversations with them outside the courthouse. Lieberman also questioned the conduct of the investigating officers, saying that Wells was used as a scapegoat. Because he struggled mentally, he was an easy target. They used him, Lieberman said, to relieve police of the pressure that the intense media coverage had created. Nevertheless, Christian Wells' sentence was upheld each time. During one of the appeal hearings in 1989, Judge John C. Bacon told Dennis Lieberman in no uncertain terms that there was not a shred of evidence that Wells was used as a scapegoat, nor was there any evidence that Cathy had been seen since July 16, 1981, and there was absolutely nothing on record to give credence to the accusation that police had made devious plea deals with Greene County prisoners. Christian Wells was denied parole in 2004 and again in 2009, but in 2014 the parole board determined that he was a suitable candidate for release. They stated that he, quote, takes responsibility for this offence, utilising insight and remorse, and has good support and a realistic release plan. Wells' brother Stephen told the prison board that Christian maintained his innocence to him until 5 years ago, and that he had become remorseful. In February of 2015, the now 63-year-old Christian Wells was released to a halfway house in Clark County with a plan to move to Columbus on his release. Cathy's mother expressed concern for her family's safety and sadness that Wells could now look to the future and enjoy his life, something that her daughter, who was about to enter her freshman year at what was then the Kennedy Junior High in Kettering, had no chance of. During the 1982 investigation into Cathy Sano's death, 3 other similar Ohio murders were being considered as carried out by the same person. The 1981 murder of 18-year-old Teresa Metcalf, as previously mentioned, was tenuously linked to Christian Wells through a piece of jewellery. Christian Wells was never charged for Teresa's murder, and as far as I can see, it remains unsolved. Then there was the case of 14-year-old Joanne Lynn Hebert. Hebert from Parole, Ohio went missing only 6 days after Cathy Sano. Her remains were found in amongst trees next to Mitchell DeWitt Road, northwest of Columbus and 60 miles from Kettering, on September 29, 1981, by a man who had been hunting in a nearby wood. She was last seen using a payphone at Tagg's Market on nearby Dublin Road. The semi-clad body of 19-year-old Robin Jura was found on September 10, 1981, in Hamilton Township, half a mile from her home on Reese Road. Robin had similar injuries, but in her case it was clear that she had been sexually assaulted. To date, the cases of both Joanne Hebert and Robin Jura are also unsolved.